could you give me just a quick overview of the sense of the market from your perspective since the start of the pandemic? Because there's been quite a change. I mean, from your point, Ben, I mean, from a mortgage perspective, there's been a huge change, hasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we've both seen, there's been changes across the whole value chain within house buying, from the point that a customer decides that they want to interact with their housing to how they actually find finance to transact on a certain property. But then also after that, from a logistical perspective, how can they move house and things like that. So I guess heading into lockdown from March, we saw pretty significant changes across kind of business that we were doing. The whole purchase market pretty much dropped off a cliff, and that's basically just because customers were no longer able to look at any part of their mortgages. So they couldn't get out to properties to do viewings. There wasn't valuers able to go out and do appraisals on properties. And also, again, logistically, there was no removals people, for example, to help people move house. So pretty much overnight, we saw the purchase market pretty much disappear. The remortgage market and the refinancing market, with customers who already have mortgages just looking to go back into the market and take a new fixed deal, that was pretty resilient, and that stayed pretty constant throughout the pandemic. From June onwards, pretty much is when we saw things start to adjust back to normality. We started seeing people more interested in transactions. We had a lot of people come to our website who weren't yet ready to transact, but they were thinking about looking for housing, wanting to understand how much could they borrow, what does that look like for them. That started again from sort of June. And I'd say now we're pretty much getting back to a normal level where we have customers coming to us to buy their first house or to refinance and move to their family house, or whatever that looks like for them. So we're approaching again like I guess back towards the steady state of a mix of all types of customers.
Okay, and we'll come back to some of that stuff on the mortgage front, because obviously behind the scenes there's been some delays and bits and pieces, obviously, for people trying to buy a property now. There's lots of questions centered around that. But I mean, Verona, from your perspective as Purple Bricks, I mean, that was probably quite stark, wasn't it? What happened pre and post pandemic?
I mean, we use the terminology of roller coaster very flippantly, but this year has absolutely been a roller coaster in the housing market for sure. Absolutely, as Ben just described it, you know, when the housing market locked down, it completely fell off a cliff in terms of sales. Obviously, we have a lettings business, and that weathered the storm of even the housing market lockdown reasonably well. We were able to move customers into letting property because we managed to move our entire model to a remote and a virtual basis. And because of that, it meant that we could complete the entire transaction virtually. We could do valuations and viewings virtually, and we were able to move people into their property. Of course, you're not taking a very significant risk when you move someone into a let for 6 to 12 months, whereas it would be much more difficult to take that significant risk and do the entire thing virtually if you were purchasing a property. So then, as Ben said, whenever the market reopened, end of May, early June, we saw a significant uptick. And then that was very closely followed by the government's decision to add the relief on SDLT, stamp duty. And then that literally gave another real spike to the demand. So July was a absolutely record month for us, followed very closely by August and September too. So we are seeing significant demand in the purchase market, way above last year as a consequence of that.
But is that now? Are we seeing the market at a level that is way ahead of where it would normally be? So obviously, like you said, activity's picked up. But have we just pulled forward what would be going on next year? And is this back to a level that's typical of this time of year, or are we in excess? I mean, is there like steam coming out the ears of everybody at Purple Bricks and Habito trying to cope with the demand?
So in terms of our business, I would say a couple of things. There is definitely an element of pent-up demand, but there is also new demand created by the stamp duty relief. So I think it's a double whammy. We describe it as if you think of a boa constrictor. One of my colleagues has used this really great metaphor. If you think of boa constrictor as eating something that is just too big, taken off too big a bite, and is trying to move its way through this boa constrictor. So we've got this massive pent-up demand in this very tight space. Our pipeline is bigger than it's ever been before. Yes, there is definitely a significant uplift on last year, but on top of that, every other stakeholder in the transaction is constrained. So whether that's lenders, surveyors, local authorities for searches, conveyancers, brokers, estate agents, everybody is constrained, and therefore that movement along the pipeline is taking longer than it should do, and than it would normally do. So there's a number of factors at play at the minute.
Yeah, and I echo that as well. I think there's a few things from the demand side certainly at play. From a first instance, you've got 2 or 3 months of people wanting to transact on houses that haven't been able to do so. So that's what you see come through in July and August. There's also obviously the stamp duty changes, which has kind of maybe got a few people who are thinking, oh, in a year's time, I might like to move. It might have pushed those forward a bit. But also fundamentally, people's circumstances have changed. People's outlook on what they want to get from housing, from their own situations has also changed. So in terms of, to your question, is it a kind of, have we just moved stuff forward from next year into this year? I'm not sure we have. I think we're just seeing a mixture of more activity from the stamp duty, but also people's circumstances and generally just high levels of mortgage activity that we see kind of all the time, all year round.